In 2005, in fulfilling his commitment to address the needs of Chicago's disabled community, Chicago Park District General Superintendent CEO Tim Mitchell appointed Larry Labiak to serve as the district's first disability policy officer. As disability policy officer, Labiak oversees the district's ADA and Illinois Accessibility Code and Chicago Building Code compliance initiatives and guides its efforts to create a fully accessible park system. He played an integral role in the prioritization of ADA capital projects and identifying ways to improve accessibility to facilities. Labiak also advises all departments on the development and implementation of policies and programs inclusive of patrons with disabilities. Larry's appointment followed over 12 years of service with the Chicago Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. During his tenure, he developed and directed the Disabled Youth Peer Development Initiative, a year-long mentorship program designed to prepare Chicago high school students with disabilities for a successful transition to higher education and employment. That program ran for 10 years under his leadership. Larry has also brought to the district more than 30 years of experience as a competitor, a floor official, a coach, and administrator in adaptive and disability sports and recreation programs for youth and adults with disabilities. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Larry. And Larry, thank you for joining us today and presenting on this topic. And we look forward to hearing your thoughts on 5 ways to make our park and rec programs more inclusive and accessible.
Well, thank you, Dan. I nearly dozed off while you read my bio, but I'm back at it now. I'm going to talk to you today about 5 ways to make your park and recreation programs more inclusive and accessible, and they are policies, staff training, transportation, programming, equipment, and facilities. Some disability facts. As many of you probably know, and if you don't, you probably should by now, there are some 54 million Americans who have a disability in the United States. That's 1 in 5 of us. It may surprise some of you that only 16% of people with disabilities use mobility devices, such as a wheelchair, a 3-wheel scooter with a motor. 49% of people with disabilities have either a vision or hearing impairment, and 33% of people with disabilities have a major medical condition. So the majority of disabilities are, in fact, invisible. However, my presentation today really is going to focus mostly on people who have a physical disability. And my slide is not changing. Here we go. 27 million people have a physical or sensory disability, and keep in mind that over the next 15 years, and I am in this age group, an additional 60 million people will reach retirement age. Many baby boomers are aging, myself included, and slowly but surely, some of us will be impacted by some kind of condition that causes us to be identified in the population of people with disabilities. That's a huge number of people over the next 15 years. The Chicago Park District functions with 4 core values: open, active, green, and connected. And of course, open is usable by all. This is where we focus on people with disabilities and serving their needs and desires. We have a fairly large park system. Let me be honest, we say we're the largest in the country. We have 239 functioning field houses. We have 24 miles of lakefront, 18 miles of paved lakefront trails, paths to keep clear and accessible debris and degrading. So my job has a lot of job security built in for the future, one would hope. 149 gymnasiums, 75 fitness centers, 77 swimming pools. I focus on some of these in particular because as we go along, I'll be touching directly on how we try to impact accessibility as it relates to those particular areas. I hope you'll all be patient with me. I'm punching the button to change the slide, and every once in a while it seems like we move more slowly than one would imagine. Policies, let's start there. it's important to have them. When I came on board with the Park District in Chicago 7 years ago, one of the first things that our superintendent, Tim Mitchell, said to me is, Larry, I want to make sure that we develop more disability-friendly policies. I want to make sure that we have disability awareness and etiquette training. Tim himself had been obese in his youth and had lost some 300 pounds. And he said, although I don't have a disability, when I'm trying to fit into an airline seat, when I'm trying to get into a bathroom stall, my girth kept me from moving about easily. And he said, I can relate to people who have physical disabilities based on my own personal experience when I was much too heavy and in much worse health than I am in now. First thing, review and develop policies. Evaluate your current policies to ensure that they address the needs of people with disabilities. Simply put, you have a policy for service animals. Other power-driven mobility devices, such as Segways, which are now recognized as a viable disability assistive device under the Americans with Disabilities Act. What about emergency planning? How are we going to get people with disabilities out of buildings in the case of a fire emergency or some other natural disaster? Things to think about, things to put on paper, things to share with your staff, all are very important. Non-traditional groups protected under the ADA. Keep in mind, there have been recent court cases and adjudication under the Americans with Disabilities Act that protect individuals who use inhalers, who have asthma, diabetes monitoring, an important element that we're working on right now. I'll talk about that a little more in a minute. And then severe allergic reaction, epithets. For years, the Chicago Park District always said no to any kind of medical intervention for any of our patrons. We don't administer medication. We don't administer injections. We will make an accommodation for somebody with a disability to have a member of their family or someone assisting them come and do these things for them while they're in one of our programs, but it's not something that our staff is authorized to do. Working with our law department over a period of time, we realized that we can no longer say that. So a year and a half ago, we instituted an EpiPen policy, and we are moving ahead with training for our staff so that all field staff eventually will know how to administer an EpiPen auto-injection in the case of, let's say, a youngster in our summer camp who has a severe allergic reaction to a bee sting and could be rendered unconscious in moments. And the EpiPen will buy them and buy us some extra time so that we can get 911 and emergency medical personnel there to get the child off our premises and to get the proper medical treatment that they may need. Diabetes monitoring is something that we're working on right now. We're tweaking our policy so that staff will assist an individual who needs to monitor their blood sugar in doing so at the prescribed intervals, and also making sure that the information recorded is accurate, timely, and correct throughout the day. Just some things to keep in mind in terms of what you're working on to make sure that the policies that you enact are inclusive, that you've not left something out that could cost you time and money later. Take advantage of existing resources. So important. Don't reinvent the wheel. When you can borrow liberally from other park and rec departments, other organizations, other park districts, the best practices of other park districts are my best friend. Project Civic Access, the results of which can be found at the ada.gov website, have a lot of information about policies that are acceptable by the Department of Justice. Project Civic Access was an effort by the Department of Justice to review various municipalities and see how well or not well they were doing in compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the outcome of that information is posted at ada.gov. And so if you're not certain about policy development or what's acceptable language and what's inclusive enough, go there, find the information, and again, borrow liberally from that information in developing your own policies. And don't forget about your local ADA information centers. There are 9 across the country. They are regionally based. Our tax money pays for them to help us as public entities, as private entities, as individuals interpret the ADA. And I use the Great Lakes ADA Information Center regularly. I just spoke with one of my contacts there yesterday. I probably call him once or twice a month and say, hey, Pete, here's the situation. This is the way I would interpret it. Do I have it right before I go public? Do I have it right before I have a follow-up conversation with the superintendent or our general counsel or our senior ADA counsel in the law department to tell them this is the way I think we should go, and this is what the law says. Again, I can't stress enough that being reactive as opposed to proactive can only cost you more time, money, legal costs in the long run. And none of us wants to field ADA complaints. They happen. I have fielded a number of them over a period of time since I've been here with our legal counsel in-house. But it's not fun. It takes away from the other things that we need to do on a day-to-day basis. And who among us wants to have the National Park Service or the Department of Justice looking over our shoulder to see if we're doing what we should be doing? Let's make sure that we are to the best of our abilities. And when complaints still come forth, they're more easily handled, take less time and resources to adjudicate. Here are some obvious resources that you may have seen before: the network of ADA centers, the Department of Justice, and the U.S. Access Board. Accessboard.gov, excellent resource. If you've got some spare time and nothing else to do, go on that website and find out what you need to know that's going to benefit you in the short and long term. So, staff training, an important element. And simple question is, well, why is it important? It's the right thing to do. It alleviates concerns of both disabled consumers and staff, and it reduces disability-related complaints. Who among us doesn't want to go to our park and rec department field house in our neighborhood park, and feel like staff welcomes us? If an individual with a disability doesn't feel welcome, like any of us, you know, it's not rocket science. We sense the fact that this is not a welcoming environment. These people don't know how to deal with me. I'm uncomfortable, and when I feel that way in any situation, I'm much more likely to not have as good a time in my leisure hours than I could otherwise. If staff are welcoming to all patrons, including people with disabilities, and we stress this in our disability awareness and etiquette training, if they use people first language, person with a disability, not, hey, wheelchair guy, hey, lady with a cane, hey, Mr. Blind guy, come over here. How absurd that may sound. But if, as an alternative, staff are not comfortable with using proper terminology, then they're going to avoid people with disabilities. And if they avoid people with disabilities, the reaction that I talked about, the sense that, hey, I'm not welcome here, will be most obvious and really put staff and administration in a precarious position as it relates to dealing with people with disabilities. The types of training that the Chicago Park District has exposed staff to date, it's not all inclusive. We're always trying to be creative in our training effort and thinking of what other training should our staff have. I mean, we train them to death, but they still breathe and live and work for us. So they're a resilient bunch. And I'm talking about with our seasonal hires that we're in the process of training. In fact, next week for summer camp, during the summer we probably have over 4,000 staff over 2,000 full-time and hourly staff, and our seasonal staff will double that amount over the course of the summer. So, disability awareness and etiquette training. All Chicago Park District full-time and hourly staff have gone through this training. It took us 2 years in conjunction with our mayor's office for people with disabilities to conduct trainings. Usually we had rooms of people about 60 at a time, and we finally, over a period of 2 years, were able to get everyone trained. ADA compliance training, we reached out to the executive director of Great Lakes ADA, and she conducted ADA compliance training in 2010 and 2011 for our administrative staff in our administration building in downtown Chicago, probably numbered about 200 people. This was as a result specifically of the new 2010 ADA regulations, which I'll touch on a little bit more later. And if you have questions about it, I'd be happy to field them at the end of this presentation. General policies and procedures. An example in the Chicago Park District that is problematic for us is locker rooms and bathhouses. We have many old buildings. And there are situations, one in specific, a mom with a son who was 12 and had autism, brought him into the women's locker room because he needed instruction in changing his clothes and putting on his bathing suit, his swim trunks. And unfortunately, one day she just walked into the women's locker room and thought nothing of it because she had always done this for her son and caused quite an uproar. So she was not happy with the results, nor were staff who wondered what was going on in their very midst, not to mention the female patrons in the locker room. As a result, we developed a locker room policy that restates an existing policy that no one of the opposite gender over the age of 6 can be in a locker room of the opposite gender to them. And we had to make some accommodations for situations like a mom with a 12-year-old son. Now, the perfect case would be have them go into the companion bathroom and use those facilities. In many of our older buildings, we don't have companion bathrooms. We don't have the money to add them to all of our buildings. And in some cases, it's just not structurally feasible to add a companion bathroom. So we developed a locker room policy that is pretty much as follows. If an individual is in this situation, a locker room attendant will, as soon as possible, clear the locker room. The parent will escort the child into the locker room of that child's gender to help him or her do what they need to do, and in this case, get them to the swimming pool, after which other patrons will be allowed to return to the locker room. And then we reverse that process when they're finished swimming and want to change clothes. It's not a perfect situation. We consulted with the mayor's office for people with disabilities. We would have liked to have been in a situation where we could have done more, but the point is this. In trying to comply, sometimes compromises within reason are necessary. And along with those compromises, whatever the policy is you develop, you've got to train your staff in the procedures that they should follow and make sure that that is continuous across the board. And it's not a one-time training. It's train and then refresher train, make sure that the policy and the procedures are posted in a prominent place at every bathhouse, locker room facility, and field house throughout the swimming season. As I said, we have 77 pools, and many of them are natatoriums, many are outdoor pools, so it's important in the summertime, but it's important throughout the year that we have these locker room policies and procedures posted. Again, the proper use of assistive equipment is an important element. Pool lifts, per se. 77 pools, we have a pool lift at each of our pools. How do guard staff operate them? We have training for guard staff to make sure that they understand the operation and how to charge the battery and how to identify if the pool lift is working by testing it on at least a weekly basis, so that when complaints come, they come from the staff to me, and more likely that way than having the public complain. And experiential learning, one of the things we've done with our disability awareness and training for our trade staff, our carpenters, our painters, our plumbers, is put them into wheelchairs. Have them with a partner who is walking along with the person in the wheelchair, go to a preset specified site unassisted, and then reverse roles. The person that was the observer gets in the wheelchair, and the person in the wheelchair gets out, and come back to the training site. And at the end, we debrief, how did you feel about that? As an observer, what did you observe? I have had many staff come to me after the fact and say, Larry, boy, I really got a better sense of why it's important to keep hoses off of paths of travel and out of roadways, and why it's important to trim the low-hanging branches that might hit the face of someone who's blind or visually impaired as they walk down the pathway than I ever had before that training. So that kind of empathy is important. This isn't new. People have been doing this kind of training for years. We've also done it with the blindfolds and giving people canes to simulate being blind, and be creative in your efforts. And you can't go wrong. Empathy is important. Special recreation staff training, crisis prevention and intervention, how to transfer people from their everyday chair to a sport wheelchair, another important element. Familiarity with various disability types, from autism to people who are deaf and hard of hearing, to people who have seizure disorders, how to recognize a seizure disorder, how to do what you need to do to respond to that. The bottom line for us, we call 911. In terms of training, BlazeSports Certified Disability Sports Specialist, there are 4 levels of certification. You can find this information, well, you can certainly get it from Dan Humphreys, but you can simply Google BlazeSports and you'll see it online. From level 1, competencies in wheelchair maintenance, risk management, injury prevention, person first language, the ADA wheelchair transfers, as I just mentioned, gives an individual the skills necessary to deliver appropriate and effective programming on a local level. I'm going to jump to level 4. That's the highest level of certification. Subjects necessary for leadership on the international level. Current issues in the Paralympic sport movement. Sport for peace and diplomacy. International exchange programs. This prepares individuals who want to be global leaders in the Paralympic movement. Now, let me talk about what I mean when I say Paralympic movement. Many years we've talked about adaptive sports, generally wheelchair sports for people who are blind or visually impaired. I'm using these terms as Paralympic sport. Parallel Olympics, the Paralympics, which will occur this year following the Olympics in London, are sport for individuals primarily having a physical disability or who have a vision-related disability. So as I use these terms, you'll be more familiar. I don't mean to insult your intelligence. Many of you probably already know what the Paralympic sport movement is and what Paralympic sport is. We like to provide, as I mentioned earlier, our trades. We like to provide them some tools for the trade, some cheat sheets to help them do their jobs correctly as it relates to modifying elements within the built environment for accessibility in the way that's appropriate under the ADA, under the Illinois Accessibility Code, and of course under the Chicago Building Code. Now the ADA standards, let me just give you one example. For bathrooms, says that you have to have grab bars on either side of the toilet that are mounted 33 to 36 inches high and are horizontal. The Chicago Building Code adds a third grab bar, which must be mounted vertically on the side of a commode, to keep it simple. we give this information to our trades plumbers and carpenters so that when they are modifying, when they're doing an in-house modification job to make a bathroom stall ADA accessible, they don't miss something. It's not a bad idea if you are a park system that has these kinds of personnel to give them some information that will help them do their job more efficiently. Another one, an example of this is the parking space dimensions access house signage. Another example is for our painters. So when they install or restripe our accessible parking spaces, they understand what the standards are and how to do it properly. Beach walk maintenance procedures. The Park District has 16 solid beach walks that run the length of our beaches from a concrete pad at the entry of the beach to the water on Lake Michigan. If those aren't properly maintained, if 1 inch of sand builds up, they're rendered an inaccessible pathway as opposed to the intention of them being an accessible pathway. We have beach walk maintenance procedures posted at our beach houses for our guard staff, and that responsibility of clearing the sand on a daily basis is shared by guard staff and our landscape maintenance staff. Pool lift operations and repair procedures. I touched on it earlier. Guards need to know what the procedures are when a pool lift breaks down, who to contact, when to contact them, when they know that it's been too long of a lag time from when I've made contact and I've gotten results, and what's the next step in the line of progression to make sure that we maintain some level of efficiency and get that piece of equipment repaired. It always helps to provide photos. When I'm out in the field, I get a complaint, hey, there's broken sidewalk at a particular park. One of my staff or I will go out in the field and snap some photos, send that to our director of facilities and say, hey, I was at Horner Park the other day, got a public complaint, I went out there, I happened to see the broken sidewalk myself, here's some photos of the area. It'll help them more quickly understand the nature of the problem, the scope of the problem, and whether it's a quick patch repair situation or whether we've got to remove 16 squares of sidewalk and get an outside contractor in to replace them and work that into our maintenance and repair schedule. Transportation. Well, if I had my druthers, this could easily have been a section I would have skipped because it's an age-old problem. It's such an age-old problem, I almost inadvertently skipped it. I don't know how that happened. My trigger finger jumped me way beyond where I wanted to be. There you go. So I skipped it. On to the next thing. No, a lack of an accessible vehicle is one transportation-related problem, and the others you can read for yourself. Let me make a couple of comments here. It's tough when you're trying to develop an adaptive/Paralympic sport program to figure out how to get youngsters from point A, B, and C to point D. Typically, if it's an after-school program, at least in the city of Chicago, we can get the bus transportation that many of the kids still use to drop them off at a park. But there's no way to get them from the park home unless their parents bring them home. There's not many people in the city of Chicago who can afford a lift-equipped van. We have many people in lower socioeconomic status who could. I know when I was a kid, and I was a kid with a disability, my parents could never have afforded a vehicle to transport me if it needed to have a lift. So many people don't even have vehicles, much less a lift-equipped vehicle, to get their children with disabilities or their other kids from point A to point B to point C to point D. Plus, if our kids are still bused to accessible schools, where they're in an integrated environment, but with so many older schools, not all of them are wheelchair accessible. So it's a difficult problem because when the kids are home, they live a great distance from each other and from their school. And even if they can be dropped off, as I said, after school at a park for a program that the Park District is administrating, How do we get them home? I think another problem is the societal norms tend to exclude people with disabilities from mainstream activities. You know, so often we think of Little League and T-ball and soccer, and we're thinking about, in general, our kids without disabilities, but not incorporating youngsters with disabilities into existing programs or developing specialized programs so that they can be a part of the fiber. And if we're not paying that close attention, then we're not thinking about transportation as a problem. Or maybe it's the opposite. Transportation is such a problem that if we develop a program in a regional area, the issue of transportation is so overwhelming that maybe the program never gets off the ground. Carpooling issues. Well, if I don't have a lift-equipped vehicle, my neighbor probably doesn't have one either. So if I have two children, one with a disability, one without, and on Tuesdays my neighbor takes them to an event, the event for the youngster with a disability may not be at the same park, maybe not at the neighborhood or local park. Plus, my neighbor can't transport the child with a disability because she doesn't or he doesn't have an accommodation in their vehicle to either haul the wheelchair or to haul the kid in the wheelchair. So, and again, funding is another issue. I find transportation frustrating. You may hear it in my voice. There aren't a whole lot of easy answers. And funding in terms of the cost of an accessible bus for a park district or a park and recs department to have one available that can pick up youngsters at that park after school and then drop them to their respective homes regionally that may be 10 or 15 miles apart. Just
Larry, let me interrupt you for just a second. We've got a few people posting some messages here that there's an issue with the audio. And I do apologize. For some reason, the GoToWebinar control panel is not allowing me to answer you. But if you're having problems, hopefully if you're having problems or intermittent, you can hear this. But if you're trying to listen over your computer and the audio is dropping out, please dial into the conference call number because that audio appears to be fine. And again, the conference call number, if you need it, is 415-655-0054. Access code 214-521-686. Again, the number is 415-655-0054. Access code 214-521-686. Sorry about that, Larry. Please continue.
So identifying resources. How do you deal with the problem? Try to find partners with similar philosophies. We partner with the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, who provides bus transportation for our wheelchair basketball program. And we provide facilities and equipment and staff to make the partnership work well. You might link youngsters or adults to the, if you have a paratransit service in your area, find out what the application procedures are. Find out if they're eligible for door-to-door service. If not, teach them to use public transportation. In a big city like this, safety is always an issue of concern with kids, any kids. And in this case, kids with disabilities waiting at a bus stop with gang problems and other safety issues, that's a big concern. But if you can teach them to use public transportation, not only for the sake of recreation, but you're going to make that individual a whole lot more independent throughout all the elements of their lifestyle. One other tip, develop a working knowledge of accessible travel options. For instance, maybe you've got 8 kids with disabilities in wheelchairs and the accessible bus that you want to rent only has 4 spots. But if 4 of those youngsters can transfer, instead of renting 2 buses in Chicago for a 5-hour period, $250 a pop, times 2, $500. If 4 of those youngsters can transfer out of their wheelchairs, you can save half that cost and just rent 1 bus. So things to think about, learn about your participants, and respond appropriate to their needs, and economize as best as you can. For whatever reason, my slide isn't changing. Another thing, here we go, retraining the parents, okay? I think we've gotten out of turn here with the slides, and I apologize for that. I'm thumbing through my notes to see where I lost my way. We're back at it. I'm sorry. Retraining the parents. It's important that parents understand the value of sport, of recreation, of Paralympic opportunities for kids with disabilities. It's not recreation for the sake of recreation itself. It's a means to an end. It's a lifestyle changer. It's an opportunity to be in the mainstream. It's an opportunity to be a part of the mix. It's an opportunity to be like the other kids. And hey, your child is blind, and they get a chance to go skiing, and they're in school the next Monday, and they say to their friends, "Hey, what'd you do last weekend?" "Well, nothing. What'd you do?" "Well, I went skiing." "What? How could you go skiing? You're blind." Okay? So this is a great equalizer, not only in school, but in life. Parents sometimes underestimate the abilities, the potential of their kids when they have disabilities. They need to understand. And it's our responsibility to help them understand. And this is a one-on-one thing, to raise the expectation level of what your child can do. To utilize the carrot of, let's say, Paralympic sport, wheelchair basketball, for instance, as an element that could lead a youngster to continue working hard in school, get good grades, get into a college because he or she wants to play in college. Okay, that shouldn't be their primary motivation. As we all know, sometimes it is, but it's definitely a motivating factor. That there are long-term benefits, not just short-term. That it's about more positive lifestyle opportunities in the long run and a quality of life. And that this can provide that for their youngsters. And I'm having trouble with my slides again. Programming, who cares? No, let's talk about programming. It's important to develop programming options and give people choices. Is inclusive better? Is segregated better? There's no right answer. Segregated programs such as wheelchair sports, Paralympic sport, a great opportunity. It's not the only answer. My philosophy is give people the same options that we give people without disabilities. Inclusive program options, you pick. Segregated program options, give them choice. The combination of both are important in providing recreation programming. Some resources. You need to identify facilities and equipment. You need to identify people who have knowledge and experience. You need to knock down barriers and obstacles. We'd like to start a wheelchair softball program, but we don't have a dedicated field. Well, do you have a parking lot that's available somewhere that we could dedicate 3 or 4 hours during the day or evening, once or twice a week? We'll put down some cork tape or some duct tape. We'll line out the field. We'll play wheelchair softball. This is the way wheelchair softball is played in many places across the country. Recognize cross-disability differences. Okay, what works for somebody in a wheelchair in terms of a program is not necessarily something of interest or concern of someone who's blind or visually impaired. Those potential partners are important. How can we mix resources so that what you can provide that I can't and I can provide what you can't can fill in gaps that each of us have working independently? No one's lost on the benefits of participation. The things you learn in sports and athletics are the same elements that are going to take you positively through life and that will benefit you in your professional experience. So it's a progression, a means to an end, as I said before. It's not just recreation. If we look at recreation for the sake of leisure time alone, in my opinion, we're really not working on the true value that it has for individuals. And we're losing a lot along the way. I'm stalling a little bit, quite honestly, because the slides aren't changing as quickly as I had hoped, and even with the lag, they've been sticking a little bit. Okay, we work from a philosophy of being part of the athlete development continuum. In other words, our programming at the beginning, it's grassroots, it's exposure, it's development. That starts with identifying youngsters and young adults who want to be participants and want to be athletes, and it really is how much they put in will be what they get out of it. Some individuals want to be Paralympians. Some individuals just want to get out twice a week and enjoy themselves with their friends and socialize. And it takes all kinds, and we have all kinds involved in our program. It's a progression in our philosophy. Recreation, again, it's not just an entity in itself, but a means to a lifetime of health and future fitness opportunities. Just some examples of youngsters mentoring each other. The mentorship part of this can't be stressed enough. Utilize teens and adults to mentor kids with disabilities. Kids with disabilities don't have enough positive mentors. Kids need people who look like them, who are adult-sized, to tell them that there's a whole lot that they can do in life and that their abilities far outweigh what they can't do. So we have track training on the upper right. Below, this was Olympic Paralympic Awareness Day. We exposed kids with and without disabilities at a school to Paralympic awareness and opportunities of that nature. Wheelchair softball, not a Paralympic event, but that's a great shot at wheelchair softball. And sitting volleyball is another important sport that we've exposed to veterans here in Chicago. Outreach to the disabled community is important. You can do that utilizing some of these resources. We developed a disability advisory committee when I first came on board, and we bring in leaders in the disabled community throughout the city of Chicago to help us identify area modification priorities, policies, development that's important, and wants and desires for future programmatic development. So answer this question. What are your goals? Short-term and long-term. They won't be the same as the goals for the Chicago Park District. But here are just a couple examples of recent goals that we've been working on. To expose current program participants to additional adaptive sport and recreational opportunities, and in the long run to offer both integrated programming and specialized opportunities for specific disability populations. We've had a wealth of history with Special Olympics. It's only in the last 5 years or so we focused more on Paralympic sport and understanding that there are people who are deaf and hard of hearing, people who are blind or visually impaired, people with physical disabilities that have not really been served as well as they should have been in the past. And we're playing catch-up now over the last 5 years and in the 5 years in the immediate future. Another one, outreach to active military and veteran population. Chicago in the long term, develop a veteran-based wheelchair softball team for the 2012 season and beyond. My colleague Dan Ferrer, one of our adaptive sports specialists, is working on that as we speak. Partnership and development, very important. One time, volunteers for a specific event, or ongoing. How can we develop a mutually beneficial relationship that benefits both parties? And I mentioned earlier, eliminates gaps so that we can work well together. It's a good idea to put it on paper, and then in order to define the relationship and answer questions, who will be responsible for what? There are going to be, sticking again, sorry to say my mouse is not changing the page.
Yeah,
yet again.
Larry, it looks like we're having some issues with GoToWebinar. If you want to, why don't you go ahead and go on verbally with the next slide, and we'll get the slides caught up here as soon as we can.
Sure, Dan, I can do that. Thank you. So sorry, folks. It's important to communicate with your partners. There will be adaptations from the plan to the practice. It'll serve to minimize misimpressions, misinterpretations, and avoid discord among the partnership parties. Don't forget to evaluate your partnerships to ensure long-term success, and expand your network by continued partnerships, opening up new opportunities for people with disability, and along the way, adding new partners. I have a list of 17 or so partners. I'm just going to read a few of them aloud. WorldSports Chicago, the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago, Illinois Department of Veterans Affairs, Judd Goldman Adaptive Sailing Program, BlazeSports, no doubt, Chicago Indoor Rowing Championships, the National Center on Physical Disabilities, the University of Illinois, both the Chicago and the Urbana campuses, that we have worked with, Midwest Wheelchair Social Club, over the last 5 to 6 years. And the result has been the partnerships featured from wheelchair softball to kayaking and water sports, hand cycling, wheelchair basketball, camping. The photo on the lower left, Juan had never been camping in 25 years. Juan became disabled through a gunshot wound at 18 years old. First time at 25, he's pitching a tent and camping overnight. Our longest, strongest, and proudest partnership has been that with the Judd Goldman Adaptive Sailing Program at Burnham Harbor, one of our 10 harbors I mentioned earlier. It's an adaptive sailing program with the boats outfitted with the seats and seat belts, and they're on a rail that allows the patron with a disability to slide forward or to the rear of the boat to operate the tiller. In other words, steer the boat, the mainsail at midpoint, or move aft in order to operate the jib sail. This is our 22nd year partnership with Judd Goldman, and we're going strong. Get the word out. That's important. We're not doing best practices if we're not getting the word out to the public about the programs we're offering. Utilize electronic media, utilize social media, YouTube. Make sure you list TTY numbers, although less and less deaf people in this day and age are using TTYs, but it's still an important element. Make sure that you expand your information on the website and improve the design of printed displays, and hire sign language interpreters for major events. Okay, some tips. Provide programming options. Again, utilize special events to target specific disability populations. We have a major event like the wheelchair softball tournament. We're going to be hosting a regional tournament this summer. Utilize the people there to expand our reach of individuals with disabilities. You like wheelchair softball? How about wheelchair basketball? We're starting an archery program. Would you like to be a part of that? We have a track and field program. Are you interested in that? Etc. Identify the leaders within your population so that they can help spread the word to secondary and tertiary groups that they're affiliated with. Discover what works for you and continue to support it. The Illinois Special Rec Levy, this is something I can't stress enough as it's important to park districts in the state of Illinois. We were blessed in 2003 and have been since then with the opportunity to draw down additional property tax revenue that can only be used to make parks accessible to and usable by people with disabilities. It has helped us increase our special rec staff in the last 5 years from 15 to 85. It has helped us spend $32 million to make 105 buildings more accessible to and usable by people with disabilities. And I encourage all of you in your states to lobby your legislature to pass similar legislation. Finally, today, equipment and facilities. Don't forget about your self-evaluation and ADA transition plan. If you don't have one, contact me. I'll help you get it started if you haven't done it yet. The 2010 standards of the ADA were mentioned earlier. They are specific to park and recreation entities, and that wasn't in the 91 standards. Review your progress, provide regular updates, to in-house staff so you know that you're on the right track. And moving beyond the norm, I just want to touch base on a few other elements. Fitness centers, consider the equipment type and placement. We have some accessible equipment in our fitness centers. We fit equipment into buildings that can house fitness centers. In other words, we don't build a fitness center. We have a room within a building. We plop a fitness center in. It doesn't lend itself the necessary space in all cases that there should be between elements for people with disabilities, people in wheelchairs to transfer onto. To solve that problem, we try as much as possible to move the accessible elements to the front end of the fitness center where the entrance is so that people with disabilities have more room to use them. And in some cases, we have equipment that can be used by either a person with a disability, such as the piece on the right, or it has a removable seat. You put the seat back on, and anyone without a disability can use it as well. We also have the first off accessible treadmill, wheelchair accessible treadmill. In this case, we don't have to worry about space between elements because the wheelchair user can use the accessible treadmill. This is produced by a company in Tennessee called Max Mobility, and this was actually the first unit that was installed at one of our fitness centers in the country 2 months ago. Golf courses, 6 public golf courses, single-routed golf cars are an important element for golfers with disabilities. The golfer on the left uses it to get into a standing posture to golf. The golfer, a single-leg amputee on the right, uses it just to move from hole to hole, a la Casey Clark in the controversial days on the PGA Tour several years ago that you might be familiar with. The Lincoln Park Boat Club, a member approached us. This is one of our lagoon-based boat clubs. Said, Larry, I'd like to develop an adaptive rowing program. I said, John, we'd love to have you. That led to our using SRA funds, the Special Rec Levy money, to install an accessible launch with a ramp to it and a solar-powered kayak lift for the benefit of the disabled users in the rowing program, but also all users at the boat club. The other ones, some of these are obvious in terms of pool lifts, outdoor, accessible paths to travel through nature areas on the upper right, lower right, easy access stairs that are much more forgiving than in the foreground, the aluminum set of stairs to the pool. These are for people who are ambulatory, people who are obese, people who have some kind of mobility disability but would rather use stairs and still can as opposed to a pool lift. And of course, I mentioned our beach walk. This is a couple of our local park district participants able to motor some 300 feet across the sand thanks to one of the 16 beach walks that I talked about. It's really giving people with disabilities the opportunity to be in an integrated beach environment with their families and friends, and everyone loves to use it, whether you don't like to get sand between your toes or you just find it easier to walk on a solid surface than have to trudge through the sand. So, again, accessibility benefits everyone. We have our big event this summer. We don't do it alone. We talked about partners, Midwest Wheelchair Sport and Social Club, Adaptive Adventures, and Costa Sea Foundation are 3 partners who approached me 4 years ago and said, Larry, you have all these beach walks. What can we do to expose the beach walks? And I said, how about a party on the beach for people with disabilities? This year, it's going to be our 4th annual. It draws upwards of 300 people and their families. We have kayaking off the beach walk. On the left side of the screen, you can see 2 people in power chairs 10 feet from the water. How often do you see that? And in the middle, lower, this is one of our Moby chair accessible beach chairs where an individual with a disability in a wheelchair can transfer in the sand and then be pushed into the water. The flotation devices keep them upright as long as they're steadied by an individual in the water behind them. This is a father and son team on the water at Osterman Beach where we hold our beach party. Some temporary venue issues, signage, path of travel, accidental barriers, coordination of services. I'm going to fly through these as fast as I can. Wheeled vehicle signage is important, especially in areas where you're doing maybe construction in a large park and a person doesn't know if they go left or right around the construction fencing to get to an accessible path of travel, or from the accessible path of travel or on to get around the construction area. So we've developed some custom signage just for wheeled vehicle users. Path of travel for large events. This is the Charity Village, which is part of the Chicago Marathon post-marathon festivities. We use this polyethylene mat, Moby mat. I don't endorse the product except to say that it works. I'm not an endorser of that brand or anyone. But sometimes things go wrong. This is a situation where somebody put a snow fence up after I had done a walkthrough of the area on Friday night. Sunday morning, we get there at 6:30, and there's a snow fence in front of the accessible path of travel. Of course, it was easily removed, but the point of this is you need to make sure that you check the facilities just before you go to make sure that they're still accessible. If they were yesterday, it doesn't necessarily mean they will be today. If entities that you add accessible path to travel at don't have a correct installation, you're going to cause hazards. You're not going to solve them. The wheelchair user has a rolling mat underneath him, and it's causing a rolling portion in front of him that's inhibiting his access. The below right mat is properly installed. So sometimes the first time it's done, it isn't done right, and you need to follow up and make sure it is next time out. These are examples of Taste of Chicago booths. The cutout for serving people with disabilities and wheelchairs was correct until it was decided that we're going to move them up in the curb. And that was a last-minute decision to make the thoroughfare for all of the public on the street wider. And these booths are lined up along the street. When they were lifted up to the curbs and set up, they were not as accessible as they were before. One of the vendors on the right added another element to his booth, God bless him, with a lowered counter to, even though he had his booth on the curb, but unfortunately he put that in front of a manhole cover. So these are the kinds of things. We are far from perfect, as I said. These are the kind of things that go wrong. Accidental barriers. We had a company that developed a large sandbox, and to make it accessible, we added a transfer system. So the kids in wheelchairs could get out of their chairs and get into the sandbox. But at the last minute, it was moved farther from the sidewalk. Then I had mats available to bridge that gap. And so in that case, there was no accessible path of travel for a big event, and I just crossed my fingers and hoped that we wouldn't get complaints. And if we did, we apologize, and we promise to do better next time. Unique features and elements. We're graced with an extended length golf cart with a ramp. These are shots from the Chicago Marathon, and after the wheelchair division racers depart at the head of the race, we have to get their gear to the finish line 2 blocks away, and of course we hire volunteers. In this case, they were people from American Airlines and the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago and Chicago State University, who offered to move the gear to the finish line. So when we get to the finish line tent, people can easily get out of their track chair and back into their wheelchair and leave the premises. Coordination and services. This is Lollapalooza. On the left side, we coordinate with the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities to provide the access volunteers, the people who are going to staff the areas of accessibility with our rage, stage, seating, etc., and they get into Lollapalooza free in exchange for their service as an accessibility volunteer. So we coordinate that effort with the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities and provide a 1-hour training prior to the event. Taste of Chicago has a number of live performances. If you hire an interpreter, make sure it's an interpreter that fits the event. So these are interpreters that were familiar with the performance artist. In this case, it was Natalie Cole. They knew her music. They had done music venues before. So they were the ones that we requested through our contracting agency to appear as interpreters for a performance. Some people are good interpreting mathematics and technology, and some people are good at performance art. In summary, all policies, important. Staff training, just as important. Transportation, always a sticky wicket. Programming, be innovative. And equipment and facilities are always challenges, but if you keep working at it, you can make improvements that'll work. And when you make mistakes, apologize and be forthcoming in your efforts in the future.